hear from this group.
I would like to believe, we would all like to believe some of the views that we just heard, that it is only a border dispute. And all Israel need do is return some more of her land, and peace will break out in the Middle East. The Shiites will no longer be at the throats of the Sunnis. Women and religious minorities will have equal rights. There will be, the Syrians will not be mowing down their own people in the streets of Damascus. Regimes like Gaddafi's and Assad's and Saddam Hussein's would simply cease to exist. And we'd like to believe that because then it'd be in our control. And that's the temptation of this view. We like to believe that things are in our control and it's something we're doing to the Palestinians, because then all we need is stop doing it and there's the Messianic era. But in the real world, that's not the case. And that's why the opinions you heard are a minority of Israeli public opinion, a shrinking minority. And I would say that some of the opinions you've just heard don't represent 5% of the Israeli public opinion. Because you see, when Iranian President Ahmadinejad gets up and says that Israel should be wiped off the map, he's not talking about adjusting the borders. He's talking about genocide against 6 million Jews. And when Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, comes out on the balcony in Beirut, as he does on a weekly basis, and he says, "Death to America, death to Israel," he's not calling for an end to occupation, because Israel doesn't occupy any territory in Lebanon. He's calling for the blood of 6 million Jews. And when Hamas, which was elected by the Palestinians in Gaza as their representative, says in its charter, and I quote, "Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it." They're not calling for the redress of some particular Palestinian grievance. They're calling for the obliteration of a people on religious principle. And so this is not something that just started recently. This goes back to the beginning of the conflict. This Palestinian campaign for genocide against the Jews goes back 50 years and 100 years. 50 years ago, Ahmed Shukeri, the head of the PLO, famously said on Cairo radio, "We're going to throw the Jews into the sea." Now, the importance of this statement is that this was before the '67 war, before the so-called occupation. And afterwards, in World War II, the Arabs, by and large, supported the Nazis because they hoped they would rid them of the British and the Jews. And in 1929, they slaughtered the entire Jewish population of Hebron. Again, 50 years before the occupation and 19 years before the creation of the State of Israel. And the leader of this slaughter was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was the founder and leader of Palestinian nationalism. And when the war broke out, he decided to throw in his lot with Hitler, whom the Arabs affectionately called Abu Ali, and he went to Berlin, where he served as an adjunct to Hitler on the final solution. And he was then sent by Himmler to raise a division of Bosnian Muslims in Bosnia called the Hanzar Division, an SS division, in which they carried out terrible atrocities against Jews and Serbs throughout the Balkans. Now, after the war, Husseini goes back to Cairo, and he fades into obscurity. He was never arrested. He was never tried for his crimes. But while the Nazi idea and anti-Semitism became taboo in the rest of the world, it continued to spread in the Arab world. So that when, for example, Iraq and Syria got their independence, the Arab Ba'ath National, the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party which ruled those countries, modeled itself openly on the National Socialist Party of Germany, not only in their institutions, not only in their brutality, but in their genocidal program against the Jews. And that party, the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, continued to rule Iraq right up until the United States took care of Saddam Hussein, and they continue to rule in Syria today, and you see their behavior and the brutality on the streets of Syria today. Now, Husseini faded into obscurity, but born into his family in Cairo was a nephew named Mohammed el-Husseini, who became his protege, and in the 1960s decided to again take up the cause of genocide against the Jews. And in order to hide his family's connection to the Holocaust, Mohammed el-Husseini changed his name to Yasser Arafat. Now, Arafat didn't just preach genocide. Arafat practiced it in the cruelest and most devious ways. They took a little baby girl from her mother, Nariya, by the legs and swung her head and smashed it into rocks. They chopped up Israeli citizens in Beit Shean with axes. They boarded a school bus in Ma'alot, Israel, and machine gunned all the students. And over the years, Arafat and his henchmen murdered 10,000 Israelis in this manner. I'm not including the 23,000 Israelis who have been killed in wars defending their country. And they continue to do this with their new chosen method, which is rockets. You see, Hassan Nasrallah doesn't just preach death to Israel. In the previous war, he launched 10,000 missiles against Israel, all aimed at civilian targets. That's not collateral damage. That's aimed purposely at civilian targets, loaded with shrapnel so that they would tear apart and kill in the cruelest possible way the civilians that they hit. Now, I just want to say one word about this boycott, divestment, sanctions movement that some of the others have spoken about. The Israeli economy is $200 billion. It's not even experienced the current recession. It's booming. And this boycott, divestment, and sanctions has no effect on the economy of Israel. So you ask yourself, why do they do this? Why do they go around to universities preaching that the university divests its pension fund from Israel when that has no bearing on the Israeli economy, and they know it? I'll tell you why. Because the fact that they're debating it in a university makes people think that Israel must be some terrible pariah state doing something wrong. You see, it's the fact of the debate itself, because their goal is not to hurt the Israeli economy. Their goal is to demonize Israel. And the same thing is true of the flotilla. The members who participate in the flotilla know full well that there was no humanitarian crisis in Gaza, that they could bring as much food under the tunnels that they brought in weapons in. And they can drive food across the border, open border from Egypt today. So why did they have the flotilla? Because the fact that there's a flotilla headed towards Gaza implies that the Israelis must be doing something terrible in Gaza, and ignores the fact that Israel today, as we sit here, is under shelling from Gaza, not the other way around. And why do they demonize Israel? They demonize Israel for the same reason that the Nazis demonized Israel prior to the Holocaust, and that we have been demonized throughout our history. Because, as Prime Minister Netanyahu wrote, slander is the prelude to murder. Terrorism, we'll have a chance to talk.
No, there'll be no exchanges until that comes about.
Don't put words in my mouth. I didn't put words in your mouth.
And I would address it. You can address the audience now, and we'll have plenty of time to talk to each other.
Slander, I will repeat, slander is the prelude to murder. You see, terrorism is not the Palestinian reaction to their oppression. It's their chosen method of driving the Jews from their native land, which they've been engaged in for 100 years. And I submit to you that it's not morally different than Ku Klux Klan terrorism, bombing, and murder aimed at driving blacks from their homes in Alabama. And mass murder is not the result of the conflict. Mass murder is their goal and their chosen method, and the only moral difference between Palestinian attempts at genocide against 6 million Jews and the Nazi attempts is that the latter succeeded and the former did not. But that does not change the evil of their intent. And it does not make them innocent victims. Now we were asked to say, I have only 2 minutes, is that right? 1 minute. We were asked to say what we would do to bring peace. And I'm kind of out of time, but let me say this. Peace cannot be achieved by any amount of land that Israel will give, and I will illustrate that in this way. If Israel were to disappear tomorrow, God forbid, if the Palestinians were to achieve their genocidal aims and overrun the country, and I doubt there's someone in this room who doesn't know what would happen to the Jews in Israel if they were overrun. Would peace break out in the Middle East? Would the Syrian government become a democracy? Would any of these things happen? Obviously not, because Israel is not the cause of the problem in the Middle East. It's never been the cause of the problem in the Middle East. The cause is the intolerance of Islam towards other religions and the endemic violence in Arab culture. And to end this on a hopeful note, there is only 2 prerequisites for peace, which is not anything Israel can do. Because if Israel disappeared, there's not going to be peace. It's something the Arabs have to do. First, they have to democratize. And in this regard, I'm very happy about what I see in the Arab Spring, and it's hopeful, and it's the best thing to have happened in 1,300 years, and it allows the groundwork for peace. And secondly, and lastly, and I'll end with this, the Palestinians have to stop pretending to be victims of a conflict that they constantly provoked, of wars that they dragged the other Arabs into in 48, in 56, and 67. They have to accept the consequences and responsibilities of their actions, and they have to accept in their hearts, not on paper, but in their hearts, that as the rabbi said, the Jews have rights in this land. They are in the land of Israel, not on sufferance, but by right, and that they have a right to create a state of their own and define themselves as a Jewish state. And on that day, all these border problems are technicalities. They will disappear. Until that day, there'll never be peace.